Group of Argentine amateur rugby players convicted for murder on the night of January 18th, 2020. A horrific crime in Villa Gesell, Argentina, changed the lives of many forever. Outside a nightclub named Le Brick, a group of 8 young amateur rugby players from the Nordico Arsenal de Zarate club savagely attacked 18-year-old old law student Fernando Baez Sosa. The boys had waited outside, cornered Fernando, and unleashed a deadly beating. The victim, who was of Paraguayan descent, never stood a chance. They kicked his head while he lay motionless on the sidewalk. Some of them even celebrated after the attack, with one of them reportedly texting, "We just killed someone." The brutality shocked Argentina, since these players were from middle-class and upper-middle-class families. They were athletic, well-fed, and protected by social privilege. Fernando, on the other hand, was the son of Paraguayan immigrants and had none of that privilege. The case would gain national attention. And in February 2023, after 3 years of investigation, media scrutiny, and emotional courtroom scenes, justice was finally served. 5 of the attackers, Maximo Thompson, Enzo Cameli, Mattias Benicelli, Ciro Pertossi and Luciano Pertossi, were convicted as co-perpetrators of double aggravated homicide. They were each handed life sentences, and under Argentine law that means 50 years in prison with eligibility for parole only after serving 35 years. The remaining 3 Ayrton Violas, Blas Sinali and Lucas Pertossi, were convicted as secondary participants and sentenced to 15 years each. All 8 were locked up in Dolores prison at the time of their sentencing, and despite the appeals, Argentina's courts upheld the convictions, confirming that the punishments would stand. What made this case more chilling was how methodical the crime seemed. The attack lasted just seconds, but it was deliberate. Prosecutors argued that the group had planned to strike, picked Fernando out intentionally, and then coordinated the assault. In court, the victim's parents broke down in tears. Outside, angry crowds protested for tougher laws and better protection for minorities. This wasn't just a case about young men gone wild. It raised deeper questions about violence in sports culture, especially in rugby, where macho behaviour and group loyalty can sometimes turn toxic. Many asked, how did a group of athletes trained in teamwork and discipline end up murdering a defenceless teenager? By 2025, all 8 players remain behind bars, and the impact of the attack still hangs over Argentine rugby. Fernando Baez Sosa's name became a national symbol of justice, of broken dreams, and of a country forced to look in the mirror. Marc Cécillon, convicted of shooting his wife. Marc Cécillon was once the pride of French rugby. He was a powerful flanker who earned 46 caps for France and even captained the national team. On the field, he was known for his discipline, leadership, and physical toughness. But off the field, his life spiraled out of control. In August 2004, during a party at a friend's house near Bourgoin-Jallieu, tragedy struck. Cécillon, who was heavily intoxicated and reportedly filled with jealousy and rage, pulled out a gun and fatally shot his wife Chantal in front of around 60 guests. The scene was chaotic. Witnesses said he appeared paranoid and had argued with his wife earlier that night. Then, without warning, he fired 5 shots, hitting her 4 times. She died instantly, after which partygoers wrestled him to the ground and disarmed him before police arrived. Cécillon was taken into custody that night, but his trial began in November 2006. French media followed the case closely as it shocked both sports fans and the general public. How could a respected national figure commit such a brutal act? During the proceedings, his defense team claimed he suffered from depression and alcohol abuse, worsened by the end of his playing career and personal struggles. However, the court was not convinced. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Many believed he got off lightly, considering the cold nature of the crime and the fact that it happened in front of so many witnesses. He served his time in a French prison, away from the spotlight and far removed from the glory days of French rugby. Then in 2011, after serving about half of his sentence, he was granted parole. That decision was controversial, as some felt he hadn't served enough time for such a violent crime. Others believed his remorse and psychological issues were good enough reasons for his early release. Regardless, he walked free and tried to rebuild his life away from the public eye. As of 2025, Marc Cécillon remains a free man. He occasionally gives interviews, but lives a quiet and relatively private life. But private life or not, his story remains one of the darkest in rugby history. It's a painful example of how fame, pride, and untreated mental health issues can turn into real-life violence. To this day, he's remembered not just for his rugby skills, but for a single devastating act that ruined his legacy forever. Nigel Meek, convicted of assault. Nigel Meek wasn't exactly a household name in international rugby, but he had his moment under the big lights. He was a strong and gritty hooker who played for the Welsh national team during the 1993 Five Nations tournament, and that's quite a big deal. Representing your country in one of the sport's most respected competitions puts you in elite company. Even after that stint, he didn't fade away quietly. He went on to captain Newbridge RFC, a proud club with deep roots in the Welsh rugby scene. But things took a wild turn in 1995. And not in a way anyone expected. During what was supposed to be a simple amateur match, Meek totally lost control. Somewhere between the tackles and scrums, he got into it with an opposing player, and instead of letting things settle on the pitch, he punched the player square in the jaw. But this wasn't just a shove or a heat-of-the-moment scuffle. It was a serious blow that caused real damage. The authorities didn't take it lightly. Meek was charged with grievous bodily harm, which is far from a slap on the wrist. Now, this wasn't some internal club matter handled behind closed doors. The case went to court, and in August 1995, he was convicted at Cardiff Crown Court, and a month later, in September, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison. This was a terrible situation for a guy who once represented Wales so proudly. To his credit, he served his time quietly, not trying to spin things or plead for public sympathy. Even after prison, Meek didn't chase fame or media attention. Instead, he simply returned to a normal life. He worked as a firefighter, which is actually one of the most respected jobs in any community, and he continued playing local rugby. Although his days in the national spotlight were long gone, to this day, Meek has stayed out of further trouble. He never tried to relaunch a professional career or make a grand comeback. He just kept it low-key. In many ways, he lived two lives, one as a rugby international and another as a man who learned the hard way that actions have real consequences. As of 2025, Meek is a free man living a quiet life, away from the chaos of that 1995 incident. It's a story that reminds people how quickly tables can turn, even for those who once played at the top. Manase Fainu, convicted of stabbing. Manase Fainu had a future that looked set. Born in Australia but of Tongan heritage, he brought that hard-nosed Pacific Islander energy into every game. As a hooker for the Manly Sea Eagles in the NRL, Fainu wasn't just another squad player. He showed flashes of serious promise. He was the kind of talent that could have made him a long-term starter, even a fan favourite. He was also part of Tonga's national squad, putting him on the international radar. But everything took a dark turn in 2019. In November of that year, Fainu was at a church dance event in Sydney, but things got messy when an argument broke out, and instead of walking away, Fainu pulled out a knife and stabbed a 24-year-old man. The victim was seriously injured. And even though Fainu fled the scene, it didn't take long for police to put the pieces together. And after a thorough investigation, he was charged and suspended indefinitely from the NRL under the league's no-fault stand-down policy. But here's where things got even messier. Fainu denied the charges and claimed he wasn't the one responsible. He tried to clear his name in court, but the evidence wasn't in his favour. In August 2022, after a long and public trial, a jury found him guilty of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, and the sentence was heavy. In October 2022, Fainu was sentenced to 8 years behind bars with a non-parole period of 4 years. That means, at best, he could be released sometime around late 2025. His prison term is being served in a maximum security facility in New South Wales, not exactly a place anyone wants to end up, and for a guy who once had a clear path to stardom, it was a brutal and very public downfall. His case shocked fans and raised more questions about how the NRL handles off-field behaviour. Fainu was just 24 when sentenced, which is a prime age for a professional rugby career. However, that window may now be closed for good. Even if he gets out in late 2025, returning to top-level rugby would be a long shot. He's missed vital years and now carries a felony conviction. Simply put, his rugby career is frozen in time, and his story serves as a grim warning that talent doesn't make anyone immune to consequences. Rocky Elsom, convicted of forgery and misuse of corporate assets. Rocky Elsom once wore the Wallabies captain's armband with pride. From 2009 to 2011, he led Australia on the international stage, known for his aggressive playing style, no-nonsense attitude, and intense work ethic. But off the pitch, his story took a darker turn. After retiring from professional rugby, Elsom transitioned into the business side of the sport. He stepped into a leadership role in France as president of the Narbonne Rugby Club between 2013 and 2016. At first, the move seemed like a natural fit. Elsom brought name recognition, international experience, and a bold vision to the struggling club. However, things began to unravel behind the scenes when French authorities launched an investigation into financial dealings at Narbonne during Elsom's presidency, and what they uncovered shocked many who had followed his career. By 2024, years after he left the club, the former Wallabies skipper was hit with serious charges. A French court found him guilty in absentia of forgery and the misuse of corporate assets. The charges revolved around falsified documents and the improper use of club funds. These were accusations that pointed to deliberate manipulation rather than financial mismanagement. The court sentenced him to 5 years in prison. But that wasn't all, as he was ordered to pay a €100,000 fine and €219,760 in damages. That wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was a clear statement from the French legal system that this wasn't a case of minor accounting errors, it was fraud, plain and simple. But here's where the story takes another twist. When the verdict came down, Elsom wasn't even in France. He had already fled, refusing to face trial in person. Since his conviction, an international arrest warrant has been issued, and as of July 2025, he remains a fugitive, wanted by French authorities. Interpol is also involved, and law enforcement agencies across Europe and beyond are keeping watch. Yet, despite the conviction and global warrant, Elsom has managed to stay off the radar. What's particularly tragic is that Elsom had carved out a respected career, both as a player and as a post-retirement rugby figure. Many fans who remembered him as the gritty, fearless flanker are still coming to terms with the reality that their former hero is now a convicted criminal, and no matter how successful he was on the field, his reputation has been permanently stained by these crimes. So, while Rocky Elsom technically never went to prison, he's already been convicted, and it's just a matter of time before he gets caught. Brendan Mullin, convicted for stealing from bank. Brendan Mullin was once one of Ireland's finest rugby stars. He was a smooth outside centre with blistering pace and clever footwork, who represented Ireland 55 times between 1984 and 1995 and even played in 3 Rugby World Cups. But years after hanging up his boots, Mullin's name hit the headlines again, this time for something much darker than any on-field controversy. This time it was for theft, and not just a little side hustle. We're talking about over €500,000 stolen from one of the country's most high-profile banks. Between 2011 and 2013, Mullin worked as a senior executive at Bank of Ireland Private Banking, and in that time he carried out an elaborate series of fraudulent transactions. He moved large sums of money, which amounted to more than €570,000, into accounts he controlled. But he didn't stop there. He also falsified bank documents, manipulated financial records, and disguised paper trails to avoid getting caught. For years, it worked, but eventually, internal audits flagged unusual activity and suspicions turned into a full-blown criminal investigation. When the truth came out, many who knew Mullin during his rugby years couldn't believe it. He had once been trusted to defend his nation's try line. Now he was defending himself in court. In November 2024, a Dublin Circuit Criminal Court found Mullin guilty of multiple counts of theft, deception, and false accounting. The judge didn't mince words. She described the former rugby star's actions as a serious breach of trust and said his behaviour damaged the integrity of the financial sector. Mullin was later sentenced to 3 years in prison. The fall from grace was complete when Mullin, at age 60, was booked into Mountjoy Prison in December 2024. Imagine a former sports icon turned white-collar criminal now sleeping in a prison cell. He wasn't placed in a cushy VIP facility either. He was processed like any other inmate, and according to reports from inside, Mullin has kept a low profile since his incarceration. No special privileges, no public statements, just time served quietly. As of mid-2025, Mullin remains behind bars. Under Irish law, he could be eligible for early release through standard remission, which means he might serve only 2/3 of his sentence, which is roughly 2 years. But nothing's guaranteed. because he'll need to demonstrate good behaviour and comply with the prison's rehabilitation standards. Now, whether or not he's learned from the experience remains unknown. What's clear is that Brendan Mullin's legacy has taken a permanent hit. Once celebrated as a national hero, he's now a sad story about greed, fraud, and the painful cost of ruining public trust. South African rugby players sentenced on murder charges on October 30th, 2009, a South African judge delivered a sentence that shook the country. 2 white rugby players, Riaan Botha and Ben Korf, were each sentenced to 18 years in prison for the brutal murder of 19-year-old Chepo Matloha, a black teenager. The killing happened way back in 2002, but the long legal battle, public outrage, and raw racial tension kept the case in the spotlight for years. The story began in rural South Africa, on a quiet farm owned by Botha's mother. Chepo Matloha and 2 of his friends had gone rabbit hunting on the property. It wasn't unusual, as locals often hunted in the area, and the boys probably thought nothing of it. But what followed was horrifying. Botha and Korf spotted the teenagers and chased them down. When they caught Matloha, the situation turned violent, far beyond anything that could be seen as self-defense. In court, prosecutors revealed that Matloha was beaten so severely that he died from the injuries. Witnesses and medical experts said Botha and Korf stomped on his head and chest, crushing him to death. The beating wasn't quick or impulsive. It was prolonged, savage, and relentless. The courtroom heard graphic details of how the young man's body was left broken and lifeless on the ground. Many believed it wasn't just an act of rage, it was pure hate. Public opinion quickly leaned into the belief that the murder was racially motivated. After all, South Africa was still grappling with the deep scars left by apartheid. A white rugby player killing a black teenager on a private farm triggered memories of a darker era. But despite the heavy social context, the judge ruled that the prosecution failed to prove racial motivation beyond a reasonable doubt. That part of the case was dropped, but the violence remained undeniable. Then came another shocking twist. Instead of calling for help or reporting the incident, Botha, along with another rugby player, Cobus Joubert, tried to hide the crime. The court found that they carried Matloha's body to a nearby lake, known to be infested with crocodiles, and dumped it. The hope was that the reptiles would destroy the body and any evidence with it. It was a desperate and horrifying attempt to cover up what they had done. For this, Botha and Joubert were each sentenced to an additional 4 years in prison for defeating the ends of justice. The court didn't hold back. Judge Bernard Ngoepe called their actions cowardly and calculated, as the effort to make Matloha disappear only made their crime more disturbing. It wasn't just a violent outburst, it became a cold-blooded operation to erase a life and dodge accountability. By the time sentencing came around in 2009, years had passed since the murder, but time hadn't softened public anger. Many South Africans still viewed the case as an example of how slow and unequal justice could feel, especially when race was involved. Some called the sentences too light. Others said it was a rare case where white perpetrators were actually convicted and punished in a system long accused of protecting them. Within the rugby community, the case sparked quiet reflection. Rugby is a sport that once symbolised division in South Africa, but has since become a symbol of unity, especially after the famous 1995 World Cup win. However, this incident reminded everyone that the sport still had shadows lurking behind its pride and passion. As of 2009, Botha, Korf, and Joubert were in prison. Chepo Matloha was gone, and his family was left to carry the pain and trauma forever. Lorenzo Bocchini, sentenced on crystal meth operation. Lorenzo Bocchini was once known for his skills on the rugby field, having played professionally in Italy. But in 2016, he made headlines for something very different. Bocchini was part of a crystal meth drug ring in London, but this wasn't just a one-off mistake or a small-time offence. He was deeply involved in a serious and organised drug operation that shocked many who had once admired his sporting career. The story came to light after police raided Bocchini's home in the Little Venice area of London in July 2016. What they found was startling. There was a full-blown drug laboratory hidden inside a residential property. But that's not all, as the police also discovered drugs worth around £200,000, including crystal meth. Some of the drugs were even dyed blue, which investigators believed was a copycat move inspired by the hit TV show Breaking Bad. where blue meth was a trademark of the fictional drug empire run by Walter White, aka Heisenberg. Now, this wasn't something Bocchini did alone. It was a big operation, and he had several partners working with him. And surprisingly, it turned out to be a family-run operation. His older brother, Alessandro, and Alessandro's wife, Justine, were both arrested and later sentenced for their roles in the crime. Alessandro was sentenced to 6 years in prison, while Justine received a 4-year sentence. As for Lorenzo Bocchini himself, he pleaded guilty to 6 drug-related charges and awaited sentencing at Southwark Crown Court. The operation shocked many in the community, and especially those who knew Bocchini as a dedicated athlete. He was once a player known for his strength, pace, and dedication to the game of rugby. Unfortunately, he decided to dedicate his time to something that wasn't just darker, but one that also had severe consequences. People often expect professional athletes to set a good example, and this case showed how even those once admired for discipline and teamwork can fall into serious crime. It also raised concerns about what happens to athletes after their playing careers come to an end. The story also shows us how some, like Bocchini, may lose direction without the structure and support of professional sport. And while no official statement from Bocchini has been widely shared, the case is a clear reminder of the consequences that come with being involved in illegal activity. What started as a promising rugby career ended in criminal charges, shame, and prison time. In the end, Bocchini's story is both a crime story and a warning. It reminds us that poor choices, no matter who you are or what you've achieved, can have life-changing consequences. For young athletes, fans, and even families, it's a serious lesson about what happens when someone walks away from the rules, not just on the pitch, but in life as a whole. Billy Vunipola, sentenced for violent conduct. Billy Vunipola is well known in the rugby world. A powerful forward for England and the Saracens, he's built a career on strength, discipline, and hard work. But in July 2025, Vunipola made headlines for all the wrong reasons after an incident at a bar in Palma, Mallorca. What started as a night out quickly spiraled out of control. According to reports from Spanish media and local police, Vunipola was at a bar called Epic when he began acting aggressively. Witnesses said he removed his shirt, threatened other people in the bar, and ignored requests to calm down. Things escalated quickly, and when police arrived, he reportedly refused to cooperate. The situation got so bad that officers had to use a taser on Vunipola, not once but twice, in order to restrain him. After being handcuffed, he was taken to a local hospital where he had to be sedated. Later that day, he appeared before a court and was sentenced to 4 months in prison. He was also ordered to pay a fine of €240 and compensate a police officer with €500 for injuries suffered during the arrest. Under Spanish law, a first-time sentence of less than 2 years usually means the person doesn't actually serve time in jail. So while Vunipola was technically sentenced, it's unlikely he will spend any time behind bars unless he breaks the law again. Still, the incident has cast a shadow over his reputation, and his club, Saracens, released a statement saying they were aware of the situation and would handle it privately. For fans and teammates, the news came as a surprise. Vunipola has long been seen as a leader on the field, but this incident shows how even top athletes can make serious mistakes, especially when alcohol, stress, or poor decisions come into play. More than just a bad night, the incident highlights how important it is for public figures to be responsible, especially when traveling abroad, because what may seem like a small moment of bad judgment can quickly turn into a legal issue, media storm, and personal embarrassment. Vunipola hasn't spoken publicly in detail about what happened, but it's clear that this will be a moment he will need to reflect on. For many fans, this is a reminder that even rugby heroes are human, capable of mistakes, but also of learning from them. If you enjoyed this, there's plenty more rugby videos in the works. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.